Well, we did it, everyone. We're at 1,000 subscribers. Presumably, we're a little higher than that by the time this is going up. I'm hopefully not super far off the mark, but I started making this video at 950, I think. And as always, I underestimate how fast the channel is starting to grow. My original plan was to try to upload this on the day that I hit 1K, but I think I overshot it a little bit. I'm not complaining. All that simply to say, thank you. It really means the world to me that there are now so many of you watching these videos and that you like them enough to come back every week. It makes it all worthwhile. In this video, I'm gonna make some new Pokemon, but I'm also gonna make some important announcements and updates that I more promised myself that I would do if I ever got to 1,000. Mostly because I never thought I would actually get to 1,000, but hey, here we go. One of these that I'll allude to now is that I'm launching a Patreon. So if any of you have the ability to and have wanted to support me but didn't know how, well, now you can, as I try to ramp up both the quality and frequency of my content. I'll get into all the big details about it and what you guys will get in return later on in the video. So if you're interested, stay tuned till then. Because I know why you guys are really here. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of it. I wanted to do a very special type of Pokemon for this very special episode of Pokepaint because I haven't done a pseudo-legendary Pokemon yet, and, well, they definitely fit the category as important Pokemon, so that seemed like a great idea for the special. More so, I wanted this Pokemon to be something that you guys would really enjoy watching, so I chose a commenter suggested Pokemon to fill the slot. A few times I've seen specifically suggested a fairy type armadillo Pokemon, and at first I had no clue if I even wanted to develop that idea fully, as I didn't really know exactly how interesting I could make it and where I could sort of slot it into the lore. But then I came up with a fairy type champion and needed an ace for her. So a fairy type pseudo-legendary armadillo Pokemon seemed like a perfect fit. For Trapor, I actually plan on making 2 pseudo-legendary Pokemon, along the lines of how it was done in Hoenn, the only region to date actually, with 2 pseudo-legendary Pokemon, with 1 classic legendary and this armadillo one. But we're not going to focus on the dragon one down, that's probably way down the line. We're going to focus on the fairy type armadillo today. I enjoyed seeing what they did for fairy types in Galar during Gen 8, expanding the aesthetic out to include all sorts of fairy tale and fantasy type monsters, like trolls and goblins. The connection to medieval or even Tolkien-inspired fantasy as a whole, I think, really strengthens the type, as it doesn't change what the type is about at all, it just sort of adds what you can do with it. With all that in mind, I had the concept of an armadillo, but nothing to really tie it back to the fairy type. Although it's not super prevalent in this first design, I thought aesthetically linking it to both armor and castle imagery would be a good way to make it fit into the type. Pseudo-legendaries as a whole are usually very significant in the way that a lot of times their evolutionary line will sort of tell a story. Bagon is a good example, as reading the Pokedex entries, you learn that it starts out as a wingless dragon who wants to fly but can't, then goes through a literal metamorphosis until it turns into a dragon that can. Just because it wished it could, I guess. This type of storytelling through design isn't super important, as you can get strong designs without that. However, it definitely helps in the design process. For the first act in the story, I wanted the first stage to be half curled up as if it were almost afraid to fight. It would be unsure and unconfident in its overall abilities, and therefore would be closed off to the outside world in fear. The first stage by far was the easiest to design, but when I started this process, I knew very little about how difficult it would be to design a pseudo-legendary. Hodillo, the armadillo Pokemon. They curl up in their hard shell and roll forward to attack. Their upward standing ears act like a gyro that keeps its body inside the shell upright and safe. For the second stage, I was careful not to succumb to the add-on syndrome that's pretty common, because although of course a second form would be bigger and bulkier and more powerful, a design with just that in mind might become bland or just uninformed, as I imagine that's a pretty easy mistake to make when designing these kinds of Pokemon. It was at this stage, specifically, where the storytelling idea from earlier really came in clutch, and made what could have been a very boring Pokemon into the one that's actually my favorite out of all three of these. I designed it heeding mind to where it would be mentally along its journey. At this point in its life, it would have evolved to have more physical offenses that might leave it vulnerable to hits, so it wouldn't really have the fear that it would have had in its first stage. However, due to its immense physical change, it feels unbalanced both physically and mentally. This is represented by how it stands, as it's not just very top-heavy, but it's also off-center, with one foot up attempting to regain stability in a changing world. Although at this point I hadn't yet done the final form, I knew where I wanted to go with it, so there are some physical characteristics like the claw armor and the tuft of hair under its chin that were deliberately illustrated as transitional markers. Its name was just something I really had to do. The pun was just too good. Combining the words armor and armadillo, we got Armadillo. It was definitely too good of an opportunity to pass up. Up to this point, this Pokemon, which took 4.5 hours to design, was my most time-consuming design to date. Well, that was pretty short-lived. You'll see why in a bit. Armadillo, the Armadillo Pokemon, and the evolved form of Hadillo. These Pokemon can be extremely hard to train. Their new form leaves them more exposed at the expense of more power. This often leads this Pokemon to be uncomfortable and grumpy. A skilled trainer can bring out the power in this Pokemon while being patient with their needs. The final form was the one that was the most difficult Pokemon I may have ever taken on so far. Attempting to fit the semi-constrained aspects of a pseudo-legendary design into what I pictured in my head was definitely a challenge. This Pokemon took me well over 6 hours, and for some artists that's pretty normal, and for some of my work outside of PokePaint, it can be. But this is definitely stretching it for a Pokemon. I suppose that's probably a good thing. No doubt that had mainly to do with the fact that I did so many illustrations of this Pokemon in the sketch part of the design, as it was super difficult to make the overly bulky proportions look appealing, if that makes sense. My idea for the final form was to dive fully into the castle wall idea that I mentioned earlier, and that I would put many physical characteristics from that onto this Pokemon. Like Grimmsnarl, it was fun to design a fairy-type Pokemon that was more physically intimidating, while also adhering to the established etherealness of the fairy-type. Here, its story would come to a close, in the way that in its final stage, it's now become more comfortable in its new body. It's grown out of the fear that it had and replaced it with confidence in its ability through its trials and tribulations. And this is illustrated in the pose that it takes, as it still holds the openness from the second form, as well as keeping the firm-footedness of the first form. The difference here is that it doesn't give up comfort for its security. Of course, a small story isn't required to make a pseudo-legendary Pokemon. There are a ton of Pokemon like the Haxorus line and the Garchomp line that don't. However, having a story or a strong set of descriptors in your head related to the themes of the design that you're going to take on really helps loads when attempting to design anything, really, not just Pokemon. Its name was one of the more interesting names that I think I've come up with. I wanted to connect it further more than I could with the visual inspirations. So Waziridillo comes from the game chess. Many of you may not know this, as I didn't know before a few days ago, but chess actually originated in ancient India. And the original queen piece was known as the wazir, which means consular. And since this piece, if you know chess, is the most powerful piece in the game, I thought naming one of the most powerful Pokemon in the region after the original queen piece was the most fitting. Waziridillo, the Bastilian Pokemon and the evolved form of Armadillo. One of the most powerful Pokemon in Trapor, they can shatter giant boulders by striking them with their ironclad fists. With the shields on their arms, they can form a wall that acts as a protective bunker. However, to attack, they must expose themselves to damage. Trainers who fully understand the rhythm of their Waziridillo's stance change are known to be unstoppable in battle. So, those are our Pokemon this week. I hope you enjoyed watching my creative process behind them. Now for the kind of important stuff. I have a few cool updates that I think you guys might like to hear. The first of which is that I plan to start live streaming again on Twitch. So stay tuned over there for that, as I'm gonna try to get some time aside at least once a month so you guys can join me in the creative process live. I think that'll be a lot of fun, so I hope you can join me over there. The first stream will be happening sometime in early October, I'm hoping. I'll have the specific date soon, so stay tuned for that. The second announcement, like I said at the beginning of the video, I have a Patreon now. So if you want to support me in my creation of Pokepaint, DIY prop culture builds, or any of my other videos here on YouTube, you can do so at patreon.com/thejohnmachine, or follow the link in the description. For $5 a month, you will not only give me the support that I need to create this content, but you will also get these exact videos 2 days earlier than everybody else does. As time goes on and the channel continues to grow, I will inevitably be expanding the tiers that I have, but for now, we've just got the one, and I'm honestly pretty excited about it. I can't ever say it enough, but it makes me so super happy that you guys keep coming back every week to enjoy these videos. And also that a lot of you engage in the little community that we formed around art, concept art, replica building, and storytelling. I know that nowadays 1,000 might be like little baby boy numbers when it comes to YouTube, but that number is just insanely big to me. I don't know if I even personally know 1,000 people, so if you have a suggestion for a future Pokemon, or just thoughts you'd like to share in general, leave it in the comments below. And as always, if you like this video and want to see more like it, then subscribe and turn on the bell to get notified when I upload next.